And
What do you remember the song you guys jammed on first at Jim's hotel room?
oh, I don't think we jammed there, but we jammed at a friend of mine's house that I brought him to. It was a stash house. It was an
Yeah, tell
apartment.
me. It seemed like from the book one of the early bonds and how you guys really ingratiated is you had the access to the best weed in New York.
Yeah, so my friends were big smugglers. My friends from college, and they had a stash house in a brownstone, in an apartment in a brownstone on the Upper West Side, and they had a false wall that opened electrically. You pressed a button and the wall came up. And I took Bob there, and there was like 700 pounds, wrapped in um, crocus sacks that were sealed in plastic, and they were like 15 pounds more or less each. And my friend Brew, he slit one and pulled out a hand of buds, and they had the best herb in New York. It was better herb than off to get in Jamaica, actually. And it was they were importing from Colombia at the time. And Bob just rolled, rolled this giant spliff, and never saw a spliff like a joint like that. Called them joints, and they were little things, and um, Bob was really impressed with that. It kind of like we kind of bonded over that, and I took him around to at that time there was one long block in Manhattan, which was all music stores, and everyone from people buying their first instrument to the biggest stars would go there to buy instruments and gear. And I remember seeing Carlos Santana there um, when we were going to buy gear. But Bob was, no one knew who he was, but like walking around the streets in New York with him, people were just like staring. It was like he had this incredible charisma. And I got invited to go on a trip that Chris Blackwell had organized. He invited 10 people. I got invited on the trip because I had been connecting with Bob, and my movie had fallen apart. And I was contemplating going back to Brazil and uh, joining the urban guerrilla. Um, and I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to pass up this trip. And it was a 10-day trip from Kingston to Trinidad for Carnival. And when we returned to Jamaica from the airport, we went to 56 Hope Road, where Chris had bought this old colonial great house. It was kind of shabby. Um, and he put a little office in this house. His idea was it was going to be the Island Records outpost in Jamaica. And there was a yard, a yard behind the house. And in the back of the yard, there was a shack. And I found this out later that the shack had been the slave quarters for the great house. And the Wailers had turned it into this little rehearsal room. And when we arrived, Peter Tosh was in there with the bass player and drummer, Family Man, and Carly, and the keyboard player, Wire. and they were rehearsing 400 years.
Wow.
A song about 400 years of slavery and how it's still going on. And I didn't know it had been the slave quarters, but just you could sense the power that was coming out of it, with just blowing this song and these musicians and this such a powerful singer. They were just blowing 400 years of colonialism away. And I thought, well, and Chris had asked me at that time if I'd be interested to help organize a North American tour. And I didn't know anything about that, but I thought, well, it's not rocket science. And because at that time, Island Records, as successful as they were based in London, and they had a big staff. But in the US, they only had one person working. They were licensing all their records to Capitol Records. So they didn't really have a staff or anything. So he asked me if I would be into it. He saw how much I was into the music, and I thought, well, I could go to Brazil and fight with the revolutionaries. Maybe I'll get killed or tortured. I had been in prison in Brazil when I was there for a couple of weeks. Or I could, maybe this was like even more important. I could help get this music out, this revolutionary music out to the world. So
Amazing. And at that time, Bob was popular in Jamaica, just from
well, the Wailers were popular in Jamaica.
Wailers, right?
They had been, up until then, they had been a trio, a singing group. Bob, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Livingston. And it was Chris Blackwell's idea that they be a band. And they had been recording with Family Man and his brother Carlton Barrett, which they were the rhythm section for Lee Scratch Perry, who produced a bunch of records with the Wailers, with them being playing on the record. So it was kind of natural that if they were going to be a band, that they would be the rhythm section.